Hey everyone, welcome back to more coverage on the Cities Skylines 2 Developer Diaries. This week covering game progression. As we get closer and closer to October, the diaries are getting noticeably shorter because at this point we already know so much about the game to come. Even game progression we've known about in a general sense for weeks now, but we finally get a more in-depth peek at how it all works, and it is game-changing. The whole mechanic of game progression is rebuilt for Cities Skylines 2, and to get us started going over the details of it all is probably the single most exciting and drastic change from Cities Skylines 1 to 2. We are no longer tied to certain population goals to grow and progress our city. This is, and I cannot stress this enough, huge. This is absolutely game-changing, and it seems on this aspect in particular, the devs have really listened to the players about what we liked and didn't like from Cities 1, as this was probably one of the most disliked features previously. There was just so much about it that didn't make a whole lot of sense, as far as what order certain services and such unlocked, and how many people you had to have to be able to do so. Most notably were trains, and how they were unlocked pretty far into the game, compared to the other modes of transport that realistically would come much later in a real city. You don't often have subways before you have trains in the real world. Anyway, that was just such an exciting announcement that I couldn't wait to talk a little bit about it. But there was a lot more discussed in the Dev Diary today that I'd like to go over. And conversely, to the last few Dev Diaries, most of the info is in the video itself as opposed to the diary. So let's take a look at some screens from the video. First up are the actual milestones. Now we've seen the screen a few times already, but we finally get to actually discuss it. In Cities 1, there were, I think, 13 milestones, each of them tied directly to population goals that varied from map to map. In Cities 2, we have 20 milestones that more or less match up with the ones in Cities 1, with obviously a few extras here and there. And of course, as I mentioned before, the way to reach a milestone is not at all tied to population, but is instead tied to expansion points, or XP. The XP can be earned both passively and actively. During each in-game day, XP can be rewarded passively up to 16 times for different reasons, such as increase in citizen happiness or population growth. But to earn the most XP, you'll have to place certain city services. This is something we've seen visually and got mentions of in past diaries, but building things like medical clinics, schools, fire stations, or signature buildings all earn you XP, which helps push you to those milestone goals. Building roads and expanding your infrastructure will also grant you XP, but not as much. So what happens when you get enough XP to hit the next milestone? Well, each milestone at minimum gives you a mix of three things: monetary rewards, development points, and expansion permits, which do kind of exactly what it sounds like they would. Monetary rewards are just a lump sum amount of cash that you get to spend on your city completely free of charge, just a nice little bonus to your bank account. Development points are what you need to use the development trees and expand on your city services, which are a brand new feature in Cities 2 and which we'll discuss in more detail shortly. Expansion permits are the official name for what you need to buy more tiles. Each milestone will give you some of each of these things, and the amounts of each will increase with each milestone. In addition to those three things, some milestones will give you a few other things as well that can include city services, policies, and management options. These are also just what they sound like, and work just as they do in Cities 1 as far as unlocking at certain milestones. However, things like city services in particular can be expanded upon outside of milestones through the respective development trees. And again, we'll get into those details shortly, I promise. And finally, a few other bits and pieces we can unlock via milestone progression are things like different zoning types and certain economic tools, like increased loan amounts, as we discussed in last week's video. And that's about it for milestones themselves and how they work. They're not inherently different to Cities 1, but just work a lot more sensibly and realistically, which is a really nice improvement. I know for myself, especially when I first started playing, I was really held back by the population milestones, and there was just so much that I couldn't do or access without having a huge city. And I'm glad to see Cities Skylines move away from that model. I think this one will make things a lot easier for beginners, which all of us will be at first, and more realistic for us as we all get used to the game. Now let's move on to the really interesting stuff, the development trees. Fans of RPGs in particular will certainly be familiar with things like development trees, or skill trees essentially. In Cities 2, each service, like healthcare, education, fire, etc., has its own development tree that becomes available once that city's service is unlocked via milestone progression. From there, how you develop your city and when is entirely up to you. And maybe your citizens. As your city grows, your citizens will naturally want different things, and those wants and needs can help inform your decisions on where to spend your development points and when. So, each city service has their tree, and along the tree are different tiers and nodes. Each new service or building type is essentially a node, and each tier is basically a level of advancement or sophistication. And a tier can have multiple nodes on different branches of the development tree. As long as you have both the development points and any previous node unlocked, you can purchase the next node on the tree. And what's great is that you don't have to unlock everything in all of the earlier tiers to unlock something in the final tier. For example, in the transportation development tree, you can skip straight to airplanes in tier 3 without ever spending development points on train or water transportation in tiers 1. However, if you want the international airport, you do have to have both train and air travel unlocked, as both those nodes connect directly to the international airport. But as you can see, you don't need to finish the rail transport branch to unlock the international airport. So this leaves lots of room for opportunity to specialize your cities a bit more and go extra heavy on some things and ignore other things entirely, depending on the type of city you want to build. Now, I'm going to admit, while I absolutely love the idea of development trees, I am, I suppose, cautiously skeptical about this actually leading to more unique and diverse cities, which is kind of a main selling point that the developers have been getting at. It does say specifically in the dev diary that by the time you reach the final milestone, you'll have enough XP to unlock every development node available. And while the order in which you do things will surely have impacts in the short term, I'm not sure how much of a difference it will make in the long term. That being said, I think there's a lot of potential to have this system expanded on in the future via updates or DLCs. In the development trees, we can see plenty of empty spaces that could be filled out in the future, and I would love to see what else can be included. But what I would really love to see would be to have our decisions when spending our development points be truly impactful. Like, I would love to see consequences occur based on our decisions, such as potentially being locked out of certain areas of development, either by having made X choice over Y choice, just in like a general sense where maybe you can only choose one of something, or just that you'll never have enough development points to purchase everything in game. It would be limiting, for sure, but in ways that I think could really be challenging and fun. Another thing I would love to see added or expanded upon would be to have some of these development trees sort of overlap. One, for example, I thought of would be that if you want the Health Research Institute, for example, from the Healthcare Development Tree, you would need not only the hospital from that tree itself, but also the medical university from the Education Development Tree. I think that would add a bit of depth and realism and just a sort of interconnectivity that makes a lot of sense to the whole thing. Sort of how in Cities 1, some of the unique buildings needed several requirements to unlock, like some needed the hospital and a university or something like that. I'd love to see something like that. But otherwise, that is everything I have for you today. Hopefully this was a quick, concise little overview of how the new system works. Despite some things I feel may be missing from it, I am still incredibly excited for all the new features, and I still think the game will be absolutely incredible. As always, feel free to let me know in the comments below what you think about it all, what things you're excited for, anything you think is missing and should be added. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And again, as always, thanks so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.